Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you're listening to the podcast. Really appreciate you. And because you've been listening so faithfully, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. And if you would help us keep the podcast going, go ahead and rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Really appreciate that. All right, now today I'm talking with Dr. Laura Gallaher, and she is a professional speaker, organizational psychologist, and national best-selling author. And she shares her message of radical self-acceptance and inspires driven self-starters to transform their relationships with themselves. Her work has transformed work in culture and leadership and has guided organizations such as NASA, Disney, and Yahoo. And when she's not serving a mass self acceptance movement, you can find her water skiing, floating in a sunny pool, playing with her dogs, Grayson and Jackson, or singing while playing her beautiful grand piano. Welcome, Dr. Laura Gallaher.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Robin.
I'm so glad that you're here. Now, you heard me read your bio,
Yeah.
but now let's tell everybody whatever you want to tell about you and the work you do.
I like we were kind of just saying a moment ago, what I would love people to know is that, yes, psychologist, and I love that. I've always loved psychology. And when I think about radical self-acceptance, which is what I love to educate other people about, it's always been so much more about my own journey with it, which I'm still very much on. Yeah, it's still a practice.
It's important. It's an important message for people to receive. All right. So, what would you say? Let's start at the basics. What is self acceptance? What do you mean by that? Because different people could mean different things when they say that. So, when you say it,
Yeah.
what do you mean?
So self-acceptance is being okay with who you are right now without having to change a thing
Mm.
at the simplest level. So that means that you're okay with your flaws and imperfections, and you're also able to honor your talents and strengths.
Mhm.
And we call it radical because sadly, it is kind of radical in today's world to actually accept yourself. It's sadly rare. Most of us are stuck in self-judgment on a regular basis. And we have a lot of myths and misunderstandings about self-acceptance that actually kind of push us away from it. We don't necessarily want to practice self-acceptance because we misunderstand what it is and how it impacts our lives.
Yes, yes. And as you're saying that, I could see that, in areas in my life where I've had that and in others. So I'm glad you're doing that. How did you get into this work of focusing on self-acceptance?
So as you know, I'm a psychologist, and so definitely studied some of that in school. And then in my first career, my first job, actually during school, I wasn't even fully out of school yet, was working with NASA. So the Space Shuttle Columbia accident, the investigation around that showed that NASA's culture was as much to blame for the accident as the technical components of what happened. And so NASA hired me and a couple of other organizational psychologists to come in and help transform the culture. And a lot of what I was doing was working with leaders on creating environments of psychological safety. And that term, Dr. Robin, are you familiar with it?
I've heard it,
Okay.
but go ahead and say what you mean by it.
Yeah, there's waves of it being popular and then it disappears again. So it was coined in 1999 by Dr. Amy Edmondson, and it really talks about an environment where people feel comfortable to be authentic and be vulnerable and be honest. If you don't have psychological safety, it can feel like it's costly to be who you are. So when you do have psychological safety, people are willing to admit that they don't understand something. They're willing to admit that they made a mistake. They are willing to disagree with somebody, even if it's the boss, about a perspective or an opinion that's shared. They're willing to give feedback. They're willing to receive feedback. So psychological safety is actually the highest predictor of team performance And Google did a lot of work on this. They called it Project Aristotle about 8 years ago now in 2016. So it kind of got a resurgence of popularity. Google did this whole study, what makes teams work? And they had this like, oh, it's this je ne sais quoi X factor. And then they realized, oh no, it's psychological safety. And Dr. Amy Edmondson has already discovered this and pointed this out. But Google found that it was the biggest predictor of team performance within the teams at Google. So it kind of got popular again 8 years ago as a concept. It's still a super important concept. And so I share the background on it because I was working with leaders to help them create that, which involves them focusing on their own self acceptance. And while I was building a pretty good reputation internally with my customers that I was serving and my leadership above me in my organization, I did this 360 at one point, and I actually did a whole bunch of 360s while I was there. But there was one in particular that really stood out to me where I did get a lot of really positive feedback, but there was this section where a few people who were on my team, right? So looking at me as the leader, reported that they didn't necessarily feel the sense of psychological safety that they wanted to feel with me. And it was just like, oh, kind of getting punched in the stomach, right? Because I understood the concept and I knew how to coach and support other leaders in creating it, but I was still self-deceived enough to not see some of the impact that I was having within my own team.
Mm.
And so that was a huge aha moment, a huge awakening for me to see like, okay, hold on. It's not enough to know. I have to be able to introspect. I have to be able to figure out how am I getting in my own way? And I found that I had these gaps in my own self-acceptance that would trigger like defensive reactions when I didn't even realize that's what was happening. I was shutting people down unintentionally, not meaning to, but they were afraid of, feeling judged by me or all these things that just very upsetting, Dr. Robin, when I learned about it, when I heard about it in the moment. And it took me some time to kind of piece myself back together and understand how do I now move forward in a way that's authentic. But that really kicked off a powerful journey for me in my own radical self-acceptance practice.
Mm. Wow, thank you for sharing that very powerful story. So, how did it happen? Was it parallel that you were now doing this sort of self-discovery and exploration and this career kind of changing and movement, or did they happen at different times, or how'd that whole thing play out? What
Yeah, I
happened
mean, so I
next?
continue.
Basically, what happened next?
What happened next? Well, so I continued to support leaders at NASA and I actually developed a lot more empathy for them, which was really helpful, really powerful. I could relate so much more with some of the people that maybe had similar behavioral tendencies that I did. Um, Going on that journey myself, I think better equipped me to support them. And so I stayed there for several more years at NASA working to continue to enhance the culture. But I did also start my own business on the side before I left NASA. So that was an exciting evolution in my career too.
And was that starting the business related to that, call it incident, just to, for lack of a better word, was it related to that turning point, or was that something you were planning to do anyway?
I don't think that they were related. I actually think that my decision to start the business on the side came from my desire to make sure that I stayed really connected with my work. I mean, I know that you speak so much about purpose. And the strange experience that I had when I was at NASA is that as I moved up in the organization, I actually had less autonomy and I had less freedom. And I felt like I actually had less choice in the kind of work that I was focused on. And I started to feel like I was getting more pulled away from my core purpose. And so that's what inspired me to start the business on the side is I said, I want to continue to do the applied psychology work. Let me start to network and meet leaders. I'm in the Orlando area. Let me meet leaders here in Orlando, Florida that might be interested in this kind of support as well. And it wasn't super smooth sailing, right? It's a journey of up and down, but it did take off.
Yeah. I like that you were guided by you were kind of following this what gave you a sense of purpose in your work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
you took the steps, even though I would imagine it was a risk that you took the risk to do that. Just to even on the side when you have a job, it's still a risk to put yourself out there and do that. Yeah.
It is a huge risk, and it continued to shine a light in so many places where I was still lacking self-acceptance. And, Dr. Robin, as I sit here today, I still have self-acceptance gaps. Absolutely. And I even invite people to think of it as, self-acceptance moments or self-judgment moments, because I absolutely can vary from one day to the next. How much am I really in my self acceptance practice? How much am I stuck in self judgment? How much has something bubbled up for me that I'm having a really hard time with about myself? So it can vary a lot moment to moment. The practice is, how can I have more and more moments where I'm self accepting? But yeah, entrepreneurship showed me a lot of places where I had raging perfectionism. I was afraid to release things and put things out there because I knew that they could be judged and criticized. And at a certain point, I eventually learned that people are going to judge me no matter what. So I might as well just do me.
I would imagine it took some effort to come to that. Uh,
Yes.
what's an example? That might be one, but if you have another, both sides, what's an example? And I'm trying to help people identify it if they're having this experience. So, an example of when they're not accepting themselves and they're having those judgment moments, and an example when they are having this experience of self acceptance. Can you give us an example of each?
Yes. And there are so many. So I can give an example that's more related to work to start with. So, an example where maybe you're having more of a self judgment moment instead of a self acceptance moment. If you have ever been in a position where you have information or an opinion or something that you think is going to potentially be helpful to a group, but you're stopping yourself from sharing it because maybe somebody might poke holes in your idea. Maybe somebody will judge you or criticize you for not having enough background to even share an opinion. Or maybe they'll ask you a question and you're not going to have the perfect answer, right? If you have any of that self talk that maybe stops you from putting ideas and value out there, that would be more of a self-judging moment. That's I'm judging me. I am projecting that the people might judge me, and I'm going to let my fear of that judgment keep me small and stop me. The flip side is, if I'm having more of a self-accepting moment, I am willing to engage in a conversation, even if it's not my primary expertise. I'm willing to say, hey, I don't know a lot about this, but I'd love to throw this out there and see if it resonates or sparks any additional thoughts. We actually, in our team, we've got a practice that we like to say, this is just a half baked idea, because we want people to know, like, hey, I'm not trying to say this is a bulletproof thing. I know we can make it better. It's just half baked. I even had one team member, she made me laugh so hard. She said, this one isn't even half baked. It's more like batter. Right. And that's creating that space to say, hey, I know this is an imperfect idea, but I want to share it anyway.
Mm,
And there's a phrase that we use to kind of capture this, which is, when in doubt, focus out.
mm,
So if I'm stuck thinking about my own self doubt, is this a good enough idea to share? Will they listen to me? Will they judge it? Will they criticize? All of that's a self doubt. And that's me focusing in. I'm worried about myself in that moment. I'm judging myself so much that I'm like tending to myself, self preservation, instead of problem solving. So focus out is where I'm now focused on problem solving. This is where I'm saying, hey, this may or may not be useful, but it might. And I'm going to put it out there. And that focus out, shifting the attention away from my own, perceived inadequacies and my fear around that. Instead, saying, hey, this might be valuable for other people. And that is worth it, the risk. I'm going to go ahead and put it out there. So that's a more self accepting moment.
makes sense because
Yeah.
now you're focusing on solving the problem rather
Yes.
than, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very helpful tips. All right. So now let's shift gears a little bit. You know, this podcast is Leadership Purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's important for people to have purpose in their work? I hear in your story you are guided by that sense, but in general, do you think it's important for people to have a sense of purpose in their work?
It is absolutely essential. And I think you know this too, Dr. Robin. It's backed up by so much research. We are purpose driven creatures. I was actually talking with a leader earlier today who said she was worried that she was on the brink of burnout, or possibly she was in it. And our conversation was about it's not even the quantity of work, it was about the lack of purpose around it. And that I think will resonate with your listeners. I think we all have times in our lives, hopefully some of you in the present, where, yeah, maybe you are working a lot. Maybe it's like a ton of exertion or, energy or effort output, but you feel so aligned that like it's fun. And even though you're tired, sometimes it's energizing. That's what purpose does. And you can work far fewer hours. I'm sure your listeners can identify with that too. I've had moments. I had one role in my career where I was not aligned with my purpose. And um, just a basic 8-hour day felt like an eternity. So it has a huge impact on how we experience our lives and has a huge impact on how much we come alive and how much we're able to contribute to the world. So, yes, I think it's absolutely essential.
Yes, and I appreciate those examples. Can you think of another example? You're talking about time, how it feels like forever when you're out of alignment with your purpose. Can you think of other examples, one or more examples of how what the experience is if you're out of alignment with your purpose?
Ugh. I mean, I think that there's actually a physiological impact on us when we're out of alignment with purpose. And one of the things I know from my own journey is that I had kind of shut down. I like turned the volume down on the brain body connection, and I wasn't in touch with my own physiology unless it was just rampant. Like if something major was going on, then I was like, okay, I can feel my heart beating, but I wasn't in tune with the small little signs my body would give me that this is not quite right for me. And more research is coming out too about how that can impact our wellness or our illness, can actually manifest sicknesses to various degrees when we're out of alignment with our purpose. So I think that it has huge impacts, really. I mean, it's not only just our emotional and psychological experience of our workday, but genuinely it impacts our health.
Yes, and I had that experience, which is one of the reasons why I do this work. In
Mm-hmm.
my early career, my first professional career, I was really out of alignment with my purpose. I knew
Yeah.
that this was, in my thinking was, this is not suited for me, right? I
Mm-hmm.
just knew it wasn't suited for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just dread, Sunday nights, thinking about Monday morning to have to go to work. It just
Yeah.
was like a dreadful thought. And then when I get there, I started having headaches.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this was
Mm-hmm.
building, and then it came to a point where I started having headaches while at work, but not at work, no headaches. And then one day, just in the middle of the morning, I just suddenly had a gushing nosebleed.
Oh my gosh.
In the middle, just doing nothing
Yeah.
that would cause it.
Right.
So those were some signs of stress looking back when I
Yes.
had time to look back on it, like my body, to your point, uh, physiology, my body was telling me, you're not
Yeah.
being true to who you are.
Yes. And
I
your body
began,
got louder and
yes,
louder until you
yes,
listened. Yeah.
yeah. And those
Mhm.
are kind of minor things in terms of overall health that you could treat and alleviate. But
Yeah.
I think if we continue it for too long, you can have some long-term and bigger health effects when you're out of alignment with your purpose. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would just say too, if anybody is listening to this thinking, oh, maybe this is what's happening for me, maybe this is contributing to, some of the problems that I experience, indigestion or all the autoimmune things that are going out there right now. I want them to know, I want y'all to know you can reverse just about any illness. You absolutely can, even if doctors are like, nope, nothing you can do about it. It's not true. There are holistic ways for us to bring ourselves back into alignment with ourselves. So please always hold on to hope that you can get yourself back into alignment and get back to a healthy place.
Yes, yeah, it's good to hear you say that. And
Yeah.
when I hear you say that, it reminds me, and my regular listeners hear me talk about this book. Every several episodes, I'll mention the book, The Big Leap by Gay
Mm,
Hendricks, and some aspect of it. And in there, to your point, he says what you're saying. And he was a psychologist out of Stanford for years, and then went into business. And out of all the people he talked to, those the sense of unfulfillment, and then they have the diseases that coincided with it, like what you were
yes.
just talking about, those
Yeah.
autoimmune diseases, and the doctors just don't know what it is.
Yep.
He calls those diseases of unfulfillment.
Mm, that resonates. Yep.
It struck me just the way it struck you.
Yep.
And so it's a powerful thing. And so for people who are listening, hopefully they can pay attention and say, hey, maybe this is what's going on and
Yes.
have it checked out within themselves and in the context of their work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are signs when you're out of alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
now imagine there's someone saying now, okay, I'm listening to you too, and I feel unfulfilled. I'm yearning for more. I just don't know what to do. Now, what's something from your experience or from your professional or personal experience that you would say to a woman who is, pretty successful? So it's kind of hard to make a change because on
Can
paper
be.
it looks good, and to
Yes.
everybody around, the expectations, all is well with
Oh
you.
yeah.
You've achieved,
Mm-hmm.
you're at a
Mm-hmm.
very successful place in your career, but and she's having this internal feeling of I seeking more meaning and fulfillment and purpose in my work. And she may or may not be experiencing some of those symptoms that we talked about, signs
Right.
that you're out of alignment, but that's her experience right now. What's something you would share with her?
Oh, so many things come to mind. All right, I'll share the first couple that I remember right off the top. The first thing is actually to practice speaking in the affirmative. And this might sound really small, but even shifting from, I don't know what step to take or I don't know what to do. Okay. Shifting from stating that to, I really want to figure out what steps to take. That's a tiny shift that you can make in your language that communicates something completely different to your brain. One is stating something that's more negative. It's keeping you sort of stuck in the like, I don't know, which is going to keep you in that muddy, cloudy, unclear space. The other one is signaling back to your brain because your brain is not just generating language, it's also listening to what you say. It signals back to the brain that you are open to figuring it out. You are open to figuring out what steps you can possibly take. And this language hack, if you want to call it that, that works in so many ways. So just across the board, anything that y'all can do to tune in to say, how can I speak in the affirmative? So I'm speaking about what I want, what I want to move toward, what I want to call into me. A second thought that came up for me was about looking at values. I think that doing values work can really shine a bright light on what pieces of a potential career or what a life can look like where success is redefined.
Mm,
Because we're so impacted by society and societal programming. It's like
mm,
what you were talking about, like, oh, you look successful. Okay. How are we defining that? And most people don't even stop to necessarily ask themselves, well, how do I define that? What does
mm,
success mean to me?
mm,
And so doing work to clarify, well, what are my core values? And I would say get it down to five. If you can really push yourself, get it down to three. Help
mm,
yourself see what's really, really important.
mhm.
And then you can figure out from there what success looks like. I think that's going to start to open up because there's almost infinite possibilities, Dr. Robin, as you know,
Yeah.
of like where somebody can go to bring themselves more into alignment.
Yes, yes, and I resonate with that. Stepping back and say, "Hey, what's really important to me right
Mhm.
now at this time of my life and
Yeah.
career?" And making
Yeah.
a list. Yeah,
I love that you put the temporal on there, like right now. I love that because our
yeah.
values absolutely can and do shift sometimes. And maybe you valued something a lot through your 20s, and maybe somewhere around your mid 30s, it started to shift for you. And then maybe in your mid 40s, it shifts again. Nothing about that is anything bad or wrong,
Mm,
right? There's nothing good, bad, right, wrong about your values. They are just that. They are just the values that you have in that moment. So allow yourself to stay open and check in. What is it for me right now?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, love
Because
that.
I'm imagining for, we've all gone through this pandemic, and I
Yeah.
hear lots of people talking about what they think it's important to them has changed, or
Hmm.
they're at least asking the question now because of it. So this is an
Yes,
opportunity at your prompting. This is an opportunity to take some time, sit down and write down 3 to 5 list of core values. What's really important to me right now? So
absolutely.
yeah, that's a good strategy for people. All right. Now you've been so generous with your time and your experience and your expertise. Is there anything that I've not asked you about that you like to share, or one more thing that you're thinking about that you can share before we tell people where they can be in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd love to share if I can just the one most most damaging myth about self-acceptance, if I could, for your listeners. So, um, the most damaging myth that people believe about self-acceptance is that it's the opposite of self-improvement. Too many people think that these are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And then they talk about that word balance, which is a misunderstanding of these two concepts. Because the opposite of self acceptance isn't self improvement. The opposite of self acceptance is self judgment. Self improvement is a totally different dimension. And so you can focus on self improvement, which I know your listeners do. That's part of why they listen to you, Dr. Robin. You can focus on self improvement from the lens of self judgment, which is what most of us high achievers do, which is so sad. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can focus on self improvement through the lens of self acceptance. And so it's actually paradox theory, is how we talk about that. You can be high on both. You can be high on self acceptance and high on self improvement. And the research is pretty clear that you will actually grow the fastest, feel the most fulfilled, and also enjoy the journey the most when you choose to be high on both.
Yes, that's a very powerful lesson to leave with people, and I'm sure people appreciate that. Dr. Laura, you have been really generous and shared such wisdom and insight. Imagining people might say, "Well, how can I hear more, and how could they learn more about you and your work? Where can they reach you?"
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, there's two that I'll offer. One is if the idea of self acceptance is intriguing and you're curious to learn more about it, we actually have a free self acceptance quiz that you can take. And it's going to plot you on that 2x2 that I was just describing. Are you higher or lower on self acceptance, higher or lower on self improvement? So you get a report and some follow up emails just to kind of guide you to get more where you want to go. And that's selfacceptancequiz.com. And once we're connected that way via email, please shoot me an email anytime. I would love to talk with you about this. So that's one. And the other one is LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn. I love to put content out there as reminders, even if it's content that people know. I think having it put in front of them again and again is such a powerful way for us to rewire our brains. So I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn too, if you're interested.
Thank you, and I'm sure they will be reaching out to you. Thank you, Dr. Laura Gallaher. Really appreciate you.
Thanks, Dr. Robin.
All right. And if you want to be in touch with me, I'd love to hear your response to this episode or anything else you have on your mind. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I'm on all the channels, but mostly LinkedIn. Same channel on all at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. Come on over to LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you, or just check out my post and you'll follow what I'm doing there. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.